Today's video is all about the 10 red flags you want to avoid when house hunting in Vancouver. I've picked up this information over my 18-year career, helping hundreds of families settle here in Vancouver, finding the right home. This is information you need to avoid a whole lot of aggravation and frustration, not to mention a lot of money. You don't want to be making mistakes as a result of not being aware of these very basic red flags. The thing is, some of these are kind of simple, but some of them are very specific to our market. And in fact, a few of them I haven't seen anywhere else in any other videos, anywhere else on the internet. This is very specific information to our market. And I want to make sure you're fully aware of all of this when you come to Vancouver and purchase a home. Let's get into the 10 red flags you want to avoid when house hunting in Vancouver right now. My name is Sebastian Albrecht with the Living in Vancouver, BC team. Welcome back to the channel. And if you're new here, this channel is all about moving to and living in Vancouver. I put out videos just like this one every single week. So be sure to hit the subscribe button if you want to see more of me and more of Vancouver. This week, however, we're talking about the 10 big red flags you want to avoid when house hunting in Vancouver. And we're going to start with some of the more obvious ones, the ones that I would say are not all that specific to our particular market, but I am going to make sure that you understand what it's like here in our market and how it's relevant to our market. But I'm also going to get into some very specific things that are very particular to our particular market here in Vancouver and the Metro Vancouver in general. So number one would be that the price is too low. When you start looking, this may not be so obvious to you, but it is pretty obvious. It becomes kind of second nature. The more that you look at properties, the more that you look at listings, you're going to be attracted to certain listings. And generally, most of us are attracted to the listings that are a better value. They demonstrate better value in comparison to what everything else is in the market. And that is just human nature. In our market, there's a couple reasons why something might be priced too low. But the biggest thing to keep in mind that I remind all of my buyers about is that the asking price is a marketing tool. It's not necessarily a reflection of the market value. It is just a tool to get as much interest to get the property sold. And sometimes an asking price can be too high. Sometimes it could be just right. And sometimes I feel like I'm storytelling here, but sometimes it can also be too low. And there is a very good reason that it would be too low. Predominantly, if I have a new listing and I am trying to garner as much interest in that property as possible, I'm trying to get it sold quickly. I'm trying to get as high a price as I can possibly get for sort of an ideal property that I know there's a lot of interest out there for. I may advise my client to what I would say underprice the listing. And this is what we see more often than not, especially when the market gets a little bit stronger. And you might see properties, actually a property like the one that I picked up here that's listed just shy of $3 million. It's built in 2024, it's brand new. And in that market, you're gonna see prices for most houses that are brand new being $3.5 to $4 million. The thing to note when we look a little more closely is that this particular property is a smaller property. It's square footage. The square footage of the land is smaller than the average, what is typical in the market. So most houses are about 4,000 square feet. The land in that particular area of Vancouver, this one is 3,000 square feet. So you only get 3/4 of the land. And as a result, you only get about 3/4 of the house. There's no back lane. There's no garage in the back. There's some limitations that make this property less appealing to the masses. So as a result, they have the price lower, which is a reflection of what you're getting. But I also think they're remaining below $3 million to make sure that they can get as much interest and push this property out there. And in fact, this is one of those properties where they're delaying the offer presentation. They're waiting about a week before this offer presentation for this particular property, hoping that there's going to be more than one buyer looking to purchase this property that will drive the price up. That is one solid reason that we would see prices that are quote unquote too low. But there can also be reasons such as there's something wrong with the property. The property might have some significant deferred maintenance that results in this property being valued less. It could be a bad location. It could be a bad floor plan. It could be all sorts of things that really mean that the value of this property should be lower. And that's why the asking price is low. But going back to red flags, if the price is too low, if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. And there is some investigation that needs to happen before you proceed. All right, red flag number 2 would be having a high days on market. This is the length of time that a property has been on the market. And when it is out of the norm, when it is not normal. And so what would be typical in our market for sales to happen is somewhere in the 30-day range to 45 days, somewhere in that kind of range. But when you see properties that have been listed for 5 months, 6 months, 1 year, well, that's a red flag. That's something you want to ask, what's going on there? I'm not quite sure. Let's dig a little deeper. I do have an example of one here. This is a property that's been listed about 6 months, just shy of 6 months, almost half a year. And that is a ridiculously long time. Even though I would say on the west side of Vancouver, we are seeing houses sit on the market for a longer period of time, but this is an unusual amount, 6 months. The thing about this property, as I look into it a little further, is that it has very few pictures. The pictures that are up there are horrible. It is tenanted, and there are no pictures of the outside of the house, only some really bad pictures of the inside of the house. And if you're spending $4 million, I think you're probably wanting a little more information. This isn't really enticing in any way. So I think below the hood, as we look at this, the reason for the high days on market is there are some things going on here. It wasn't marketed particularly well. There could be some issues with the tenant. And there could be some issues with the house that we're not really able to tell based on the limited amount of information. So what we have just isn't enough to get this property sold. And so this is where another example, if there are a high days on market, you want to look under the hood, ask some questions, get your real estate agent to investigate a little further so that you understand what it is going on here. All right, so another big red flag would be a listing that comes on and off the market a number of times. Now, there are some situations where that's not going to be as unusual. When the market slows down, things are slow, and when the seasons change, that is a time where we tend to see listings that haven't sold, that have grown a little bit stale, they get taken off the market and put back on. And that is a tactic that I personally would use with a listing. It allows me to refresh the property if I bring it back to the market. And in fact, I just did that with a listing where, we had it on through the summer and it didn't sell. Well, now we're moving into the fall season. We've gotten past Labor Day. So we took it off the market, we lowered the price, and we brought it back on. The whole idea is I'm bringing it back on top of the pile, because so often when things sit and sit for a long time in the market, they get buried under everything else and people just don't really pay attention. Plus, because it's a red flag to be on the market for a long time, people start to assume that there's something wrong with it without doing too much investigation. So it can allow your listing to refresh. But the thing is, what happens if there's a listing that comes on and off the market a number of times? I don't just mean once or even twice. I mean, once is reasonable. Twice, depending on the market, depending on the type of property, can be understandable. But if it's 5, 6 times in a relatively short period of time, there's something worth investigating there and something to pay attention to. So I have a property here this property on the downtown east side, looking at it, it's been on and off the market 4 times in the last year. And that's pretty significant. In fact, it's not even a year. It's roughly 6 months, going back to March of this year, and it's September right now. So yeah, that's exactly 6 months. They've dropped the price. Each time that they relisted, they dropped the price, except for the most recent time. So the last time it was listed for $724,800, and they've brought it back on the market now at the same price. So, the assumption would be that they feel that this is the right price, that they just were in a bad market through the summer. And they're probably feeling like, well, with interest rates starting to drop, there should be some renewed interest at this price. And I probably wouldn't argue so much with that. I would say, what I see of this area in particular, this property was last sold it was COVID. So this area has been hard hit with COVID, and it's not as desirable. It's not as trendy an area as a result. And I would feel that that's one of the reasons that this particular unit is having some issues getting sold. It's really a case by case basis. And this, again, when you see a property coming on and off the market a number of times, you do wonder what's happening, and you do need to investigate, and you need your real estate agent to look a little deeper to help you understand what might be a red flag based on this information. All right. So Issue number 4 would be having a problematic tenant. And this can be a real issue. When I'm working with sellers, an investor who has a property that's tenanted. In fact, I was just on the phone before filming this video with a client of mine who's talking about selling a tenant occupied property. My advice to him was the tenant is moving out next month. So that's an ideal time. Don't put another tenant in it if you want to sell in the next 6 months or so. It might be better to sell now rather than in the spring when, yes, the market might be a couple points higher, but it'll be a whole lot easier to get it sold now than it will in the spring if you put a new tenant in place. A tenant with any property can be a real issue, basically because if you're the owner occupying the property, well, you have a vested interest in getting that property sold. So you're doing everything you can to accommodate showings to make it look as good as possible. A tenant, no matter how good of a tenant is, it sucks for them. They don't get anything out of a property being sold. And in fact, more than likely, they're going to lose their home. So when I'm approaching a tenant and it's my listing, I do so with complete and utter respect that it is their home and an understanding that I'm an inconvenience to them. So the tenant, is really having a hard time. Their life is being impacted. They're getting showing requests. They're having to clean all the time. They're sort of annoyed at the entire process. And that's a good tenant. Well, if you have a bad tenant, if you have a tenant that just from the outset wasn't a particularly accommodating, understanding tenant, well, it's going to get worse and worse. And it's going to become really hard to show a property. So this property that I just brought up as a high days on market property, I don't know if the tenant is an issue with this property, but just from the photos and the way that the property shows, I would make the assumption that probably the tenant has something to do with the fact that this property hasn't sold. It doesn't show particularly well. If you do have a tenant, if you come across a property that's tenant occupied, you do have to remember in British Columbia now, you have to give 3 months notice to that tenant if you as the new buyer want to take possession of the property. So that can be a problem for you, particularly if you want to occupy it, let alone whether the tenant is going to leave on time or in what condition they're going to leave the property. Now, there are protections we can put in place for you when you take over a property that is tenant occupied. We can make sure that it's in the contract that you are protected, but the hassle of having to go through with that can be a hassle for a lot of people. If the tenant is showing signs that they are not particularly cooperative, that might be a red flag where you might want to reconsider whether this is a particular tenant occupied property that you want to deal with, whether it's worth it. And that's just a red flag that you want to pay attention to and you want to do some further investigations of. Personally, I have never had a client that has had a property where the tenant hasn't moved out. I know this is a bigger issue for a lot of my clients that come from Ontario. A lot of people are worried about that. In BC, that's not really an issue. We can deal with it relatively quickly. And 99% of the time, the tenant understands that there are rules and regulations in place. So long as it's done above board with the proper documentation and everything is legit, well, the tenant has to move out. And if they don't, they have to move out. At worst, it might take, at this point, it's about 2 to 4 weeks. And that would suck. You don't want to be in a position where you don't get to move into your new home for 2 to 4 weeks. But honestly, it has never happened to me. Of the hundreds and hundreds of homes that I've sold, and many of them have been tenant occupied, not once has a uncooperative tenant delayed possession for a buyer. Just something to keep in mind. This is an issue you want to have at the forefront of your mind. If you notice some signs that a tenant may not be super cooperative, and it's not one that I would obsess about. All right, so issue number 5 would be a whole lot of listings that come up in the same condo building development, in the case of a strata, or in the same neighborhood. And yeah, there is a limit. There is a point at which you should question what's going on there. But honestly, most people question it long before it's really an issue. So the rule of thumb is somewhere in the neighborhood of 5% of a neighborhood or of a building could be on sale at any one point in time. So you can imagine a development where there's 100 units, 5 of those units could be for sale. And that would be pretty normal. In fact, it's kind of 5 to 10%, somewhere in that range. But if you see 15 units for sale in a development of 100, well, that is a red flag. Something is going on there. And personally, I'd be concerned, are these rats fleeing a sinking ship, right? Is this an enormous red flag? That would be about as big a red flag as you could possibly find. But if there's only 4, 5, 6 units for sale in a building of 100, that is really normal. And I really wouldn't worry about it, that people are sort of fleeing and trying to get out before some disastrous event. And some things that this could be an indication of when you're seeing more than 10% in that, 15 out of 100 units. Well, maybe there's a big assessment that's coming up. Maybe there's some massive redevelopment that's happening right next door. Same thing for a neighborhood, right? Like maybe they're doing away with the park and building a factory in that neighborhood, or maybe they're turning a single family residential neighborhood into an industrial zone. Those would be indications, things that, that red flag would be worthwhile paying attention to. But again, this is a red flag you want to pay attention to. Just don't panic, and have you and your real estate agent do a little more digging. All right, so number 6 would be a new renovation, something like within the last few months, or, a recent sale and then a renovation and being put back on market. So essentially a flip. That is where, for me, it becomes most concerning. I know from my own history in owning property, I bought a place like that. It was a townhouse on Commercial Drive, like 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago. And I bought it, and it was owned, the guy owned half the building, and they were all rentals. And before putting them on the market, he did the lipstick on a pig renovation. And it was basically just brand new flooring and brand new paint. That was it. And to me, it was fine. There was no concern that anything was being hidden in this particular case. But to me, actually, I felt bad about it because the quality of what they did was so poor. It was the cheapest laminate floor that they could possibly buy from IKEA. It was like 80 cents a square foot or something like that. And the paint was like this awful yellow, really pale yellow color that I could not get on board with. I wanted nothing more than to rip out that floor, but I felt really guilty about doing that because it had just been done. And that to me felt wasteful. So I lived with that awful floor. I think it was about 5 years. In fact, until I turned it into an investment property. I don't know. I guess it was a good investment property floor. But this is the sort of thing you want to watch for, right? So a renovation that is just poorly done, and somebody who's skipping corners. And so often when something is done just to flip, that could be what is being done. And we don't know that. It's relatively easy to hide things when you do a renovation like that. Could they have done the renovation to hide some significant issues with the property in the first place? That's possible. You do, when a renovation has been done, there is some pretty easy sort of steps to take to make sure that it's a decent renovation. And one of those would be calling the city, seeing if there are permits that were taken out. Are those permits closed? And checking if it's in a strata to make sure that the strata approved those renovations. Now, those are steps that we can ensure, the renovation isn't going to be required to be torn out within a few months, but it's still possible that it wasn't quite done to the highest standards. And you're probably going to want to bring in an inspector, a licensed inspector, to give you an opinion of the quality of that renovation and just to double check that everything was done properly and is tickety-boo. You don't want to be paying for a high quality renovation only to discover it wasn't done really well a few months down the road and something needs to be redone. That can cost you a whole lot of money. Now, I'm much more a fan of a renovation that was done for a homeowner, somebody who is not planning on selling, and maybe the renovation was done 2 years ago or 5 years ago, and they lived with it and they enjoyed it, but they did it for their own personal use because the likelihood that they did it really, really well is much higher. I'm going to give you one example of a renovation that stood out to me. I just had a look over the MLS this afternoon, and here's one, a very expensive house, $4.3 million, a big piece of land, 6,000 square feet. It's an older house built in 1930. It looks beautiful. The photos look great. I know nothing about this renovation. For all I know, this could be a very high quality renovation, but it was done very recently. It was done in 2024. So it was just completed. To me, this property was only bought last year. We can look at the history and we go back and we can see it was purchased at the end of 2023. And they brought it back on in May. So within a very, very short period of time, they renovated this property. They bought the property, they renovated it, and they've put it back on the market. And this would be one where I'd just be curious. I would just make sure, especially because this is the third time that it's been listed. This has been on and off the market now 3 times. And that's another red flag, right? So these things in combination would make me want to be curious and look at this more carefully and make sure that I ask a lot of questions and make sure that I have a really good inspector to look into this for me. Another big red flag you just want to pay very close attention to and investigate fully. So red flag number 7 is not having any photos, or maybe just having one or very few photos. I mean, we're allowed in our MLS to have up to 40 photos. And so the first thing that comes to mind is typically, well, there's just bad marketing. But there could be other issues at play. Might be something wrong with the exterior of the house. Like it might be in the wrong location. It might just not be very photogenic. Could be some really ugly house right next door or something. I mean, most Vancouver houses are very close together. And honestly, with condos, more often than not, I mean, the exterior of a condo building is kind of generic. So if it's a condo, I'm not going to be too concerned if it's just the exterior of the building. That's the first photo, or that they choose not to show the exterior of the building. But I am going to wonder if it's a house or a townhouse, why they might not be showing the exterior and what that might indicate about it. It can also indicate perhaps that there's an issue with the tenant, if there is a tenant in place. This one at 79 West 18th has no photos of the inside. There's only a picture of the outside and then a couple of images of a floor plan. And then it's owner occupied. So that to me is a little bit odd, because if it's owner occupied, it should be showing very well. But perhaps in this case, I don't know, it might be a hoarder or something like that. And I do have to point out that unlike other markets in Vancouver specifically, especially when it comes to houses, so much of the value of the property is driven by the lot value. There's not a lot of value in the home itself, unless it's new. But in this case, it's a house built in 1911. It's a little bit of an oversized house or sort of lot at 4,500 square feet. And in fact, the house itself is kind of oversized at 2,800 square feet. So lot and house are a bit bigger than normal. This has a little more value, but at 3.5 million, you would think people would be showing what the inside was like and make an effort to make that look as good as they possibly can when they're selling it. But to me, the fact that there's no photos of the inside, only of the outside, does indicate a bit of a red flag there. This one at 2565 West 2nd Avenue is another one with no photos. And in fact, not only no photos, but no public description, no public remarks. So they're not saying anything about this property, just the lot size, 3,600 square feet. And then the house size is 100 square feet. Well, this obviously raises a bunch of red flags and question marks in my head. And I did double check Google Street View, and I would recommend when you notice that there's no photos of the outside or there's no photos at all, definitely just type in the address and see what comes up. Not just Google Street View, but Google in general. I mean, what happens if there was a murder at that location? Well, you find out by just Googling the address, which is always a worthwhile exercise. But in this particular case, when we check out Google Street View, we realize there's no house here at all. And in Vancouver, that's pretty unusual because Vancouver has been built out for decades and every single lot has a house on it. In this case, there is no house on this lot. It has been torn down. And as a result, they're trying to sell the lot. Most likely it's owned by a builder and they're sort of in the process of getting approval for building a new house, but they're trying to see if they can move the house, if they can get that house sold in the meantime as they're moving forward and sort of recuperate some of their investment. 506 3438 Van Ness Avenue. And this one also has no photos at all. But in this case, this is a brand new listing. And I think this is important to point out. A brand new listing just listed today. This is not totally uncommon that the listing just won't have photos yet. So when I checked today, there were no photos. And when we have a look back at this a week from now, there's probably going to be photos. It might just take 24 hours. Some realtors aren't quite on the ball to get the photos onto the listing immediately as soon as the listing hits. Sometimes it gets on there a little faster than you would expect. So as much as this is a red flag, there are some legitimate answers as to why there may not be any photos. And this would be an example of that. Having no photos is definitely another red flag that you, using Google, or your realtor using the MLS and calling the other listing agent, can investigate and figure out why that might be. But when there's no photos, it's definitely a red flag that I would pay attention to. All right, red flag number 8 would be deferred maintenance. And by deferred maintenance, every building needs maintenance. I mean, it's like owning a car, right? And if you have an old car and every car becomes old as soon as you drive it off the lot, you have to maintain it. You have to bring it into the mechanic and you have to get things fixed over time. A part replaced here, a tune up here, windshield wipers replaced there. And it's the same thing when you own a home of any kind, but it's a bigger issue when you own a condo because you're not in sole control of when everything is done. Now, this is an important thing whether you're buying a house, a townhouse, or a condo, or a half duplex. Whatever housing style you're looking at purchasing in Vancouver, you want to pay attention to what are the regular maintenance issues and items that might not have been done yet. And some of those we can pick up really quickly in a photo. You might see in a picture that the front steps are askew or falling apart, or you might notice that the roof is sagging, or the front porch is sagging, or the windows aren't perfectly even. There could be all sorts of little things that you can pick up in photos, but more often than not, these are things that you only really recognize when you're there in person. But do pay attention to the pictures. And this is why when there's no photos or very few photos, it does raise a bit of a red flag. And one of the other concerns I would have is, are there deferred maintenance items that were not, that might be easily recognized in pictures, and that's why the pictures aren't being taken. You want to be able to walk through the building. You want to check and feel the building to see if there's anything that's really obvious to you. If it is a strata, you also want to read through those strata documents, see if they're talking about some issues that are coming up in the future. Having done those things and you're still moving forward and you decide to write an offer, well, you also want to hire a professional building inspector to look at your property and give you an objective opinion on what may or may not be going right in that strata or with that building. And they can give you a really strong opinion at the very least. You know, like if it's a house, when was the last time that furnace was replaced? How old is that furnace? Does it look like there's any signs of water damage? Like, does the drain tile need to be replaced? And they've been having flooding over the last few years. There can be all types of deferred maintenance depending on what kind of property it is. But it is something that using your own intuition and observational skills, you're going to be able to pick up on from the photos and from walking through the property in person. That is always, always important. And a major red flag that you want to pay very close attention to. And yet another significant red flag would be if the building is under a tarp. And this is true whether it's a house, townhouse, or a condominium. Again, similar to the deferred maintenance, I feel like it's a bigger issue when it's a condominium because it's more obvious. It's a bigger deal that is less in your control. You're only one person out of the entire strata. You're one owner out of 50 or 100 or 200. And it's very difficult to turn around a ship that's going in the wrong direction. By the time that there's a tarp over a building, it's typically because it's been going in the wrong direction. I mean, it's not an absolute situation. Predominantly, it's because they're trying to fix something and a significant something. And it could be perhaps just the roof at the wrong time of year. Maybe it started leaking. And so you see this with houses not uncommonly, especially in our winters where we get a fair amount of rain. We've gone through a dry summer, and then once it starts raining in November, all of a sudden you start seeing tarps going on roofs because, you know, the roof made it through the last winter and then it kind of got worn through in that summer. And by the time the rain hits, it's kind of like it's too late to organize a brand new roof. So the roofer will come and put a tarp over the house just to get through a month or 6 weeks or something before the roofer can get to the job. In terms of a strata, this can be a much bigger issue. And more commonly, it's if you're replacing windows or repairing the exterior of the building in some way. You know, obviously, if they're going to replace windows and they happen to be doing that in a colder, wetter period, they're going to tarp the entire building. But the biggest significant issue with condominiums is that it might be a leaky condo that is being rain screened. And that is an enormous red flag. It's great that they're doing the work. It's going to be spectacular once the work is done. It's just going to be challenging for you to actually purchase it if the work is underway. It could most likely, if the work hasn't been completed yet, the building has actually been red flagged by the insurance company, and it might be very difficult to get a mortgage on a building like that. Could be a great opportunity if you have the cash, but it may not be possible to purchase if you don't have the cash because no bank will lend on a building that has been red flagged like that. So I took a look around. I found a couple examples of buildings that were put under tarps. I knew which building to go and have a look at. This building on Broadway, a bit of an albatross. It's a building which a lot of people end up being attracted to that are very price sensitive and are attracted by relatively low prices. But this building has had issues, structural issues, for decades. As a result, prices are incredibly low. They've had a hard time figuring out what the issues around the building were, and they're trying to fix them, which is great. It's another one of those issues, aside from needing rain screening or replacing windows, that you want to be really cautious of. And you need to be sure, if you're buying into a building like that, that you're buying at the right price, that you know what you're getting into, that you're protecting yourself at every turn possible. I have had clients purchase in buildings that have had issues knowingly, and they've been able to get a good deal. They've gone in with their eyes wide open. The banks know about it. They know about it. Nobody's pulling the wool over anybody's eyes. And if you're in a situation like that, buying into a building like these ones that have tarps over them, they can be good opportunities, because you're moving in at a time where perhaps the current owner is having financial difficulties. It becomes an opportunity. Price is relatively low. Once that work is done, the price is going to be much higher, because there's going to be a lot of confidence in the work that was done and that the issues in the building have been taken care of. But you do need to be incredibly careful when you purchase into situations like this. All right, so we're going to look into two issues that are very specific to stratas. And so many people that are buying in Metro Vancouver are buying stratas. More than 50% of all sales are strata, whether it's a half duplex, a townhouse, or a condominium. But this one is pretty specific to townhouses and condos. And this is high maintenance fees. You want to question why there are high maintenance fees. And if the maintenance fees are exceedingly high, and I would say, for the most part, maintenance fees should be somewhere in the range of 50 cents per square foot to 65, maybe 70 cents a square foot. They could be higher because you're in a little bit older building. There could be some utilities included. It could be heat. As an example, hot water is almost always included, but heat is a bit of an unusual one. And if heat's included, then your maintenance fees could expectedly be a little higher. And if you have better amenities, you're going to probably be paying for those. Things like a 24-hour concierge, pool, hot tub, really nice gym. Having hotel quality amenities costs money. And so you would expect to be at the higher end of the range. But if you're in a very basic building and those maintenance fees are creeping up, then that is a red flag. I have a couple of examples, and these are on the higher end of what I would say would be normal. But this one here at 1568 Alberni, their maintenance fees are just about $1 a square foot per month. That's pretty substantial. A 724 square foot, one bedroom, the maintenance fee is $721 a month. That is high, but this is a new, pretty exceptional building with an incredibly high quality and level of amenities. I mean, if you look at what the amenities in this building are, they are high quality. And so of course that costs money. But what I would look at when I'm looking at a unit like this is, does it make sense? Am I getting value for that money? If you really value a really nice hot tub and a really great concierge and a great gym, this could be the one. But my concern with this particular unit, I look at the floor plan. For 724 square feet, if we look at the floor plan, and I'm going to bring it up on the screen here, it's not the best use of 724 square feet. It's kind of long and narrow. There's a bit of a hallway. I don't love this layout. And so for me, I would rather be in a much more efficient, smaller floor plan in this building to be able to get the same quality of amenities, maybe not quite as much space, but more usable space. So if I was only in 550 square feet, I'd be saving close to $200 every single month. And that can add up. That can be pretty substantial. That's a substantial amount of your mortgage that could be paid off every single month. So not only do you want to look at the total amount that you're paying, you want to look at that in relation to the square footage. And then you want to think about that in relation to the quality of the amenities you're getting, the functional space that you actually have. Is that good value for the amount of space that you get, the usable space that you have? In this case, I feel like it's not the choice that I would personally make. Now, here's another example of a very high quality building at 1111 Alberni, where the maintenance fees are over $1 a square foot. Now, this building is a little bit unusual in that it shares, it's part hotel and part condominium. And as a result, you're sharing hotel quality amenities. They have an excellent concierge. They have a nice pool, hot tub. You can make use of the spa. There's a little cafe, a fantastic gym. This is an unusual building in that they also have a service elevator. They even have garbage chutes, which I haven't spoken about this before, but I do find people coming from other markets always are like, do you not have garbage chutes here? No, we don't. This is one of the few buildings in Vancouver that actually has them, and a garbage room on each floor, which is pretty cool. So in any case, with this building, you're paying well over $1 a square foot. So for this 1,554 square foot condo, a beautiful 2-bedroom condo, I have to say, and in this building, like, the views can be absolutely exceptional. They are paying almost $2,000 a month. And so what is that? $1.25 a square foot, something in that range, $1,937 per month. And you obviously need to be aware, you need to feel that that is good value to you. You need to be able to budget for it. And you also need to be able to pay off your mortgage. But these high maintenance fees, people are comparing. Like, if I have a client that is looking in this price range, let's say up to $1.9 million, $2 million for a luxury condo downtown, if they're looking at this unit with nearly a $2,000 maintenance fee, and there's another unit that is similar size, similar price, but the maintenance fee is half, it's $1,000 a square foot, that will be a better value. At the end of the day, people look at, what is my monthly outlay? What does this cost me every single month? And this property, without necessarily getting a significant extra benefit, you're paying a whole extra $1,000 on what the competition might be paying. And that can make this more challenging to sell. And it can also make it sort of put a lid on the potential return, as because people do compare these two properties. That's generally a conversation I'm having when I have listings with high maintenance fees, is we do have to take into account how much of a mortgage people would be able to pay with that money and how it compares to those other properties that have lower maintenance fees. Those other units that have lower maintenance fees can legitimately ask more money. So once again, high maintenance fees, red flag. You want to pay attention how this impacts you and whether you find it's good value or not. And now number 11 is whether or not the building is self-managed. And so with stratas, they typically have a property management company. It becomes less common the smaller that strata is. And the cutoff point is around somewhere between 8 and 12 units. I find in that ballpark, it's about 50-50 whether they're professionally managed or not. It becomes too expensive for the strata to afford property management fees. From the property management company's perspective, economies of scale. As they get bigger, they can charge less per door. So a 100-unit building, they can charge each unit less money to be professionally managed. And that cost gets spread out over more units. But per door, they have to charge more money because they're essentially doing a lot of similar work for a 12-unit building that they are for a 50-unit building. And the result is that a lot of the smaller stratas choose not to be professionally managed. But when they're not professionally managed, there are things that could go awry. They don't have professional guidance helping them understand rule changes or how to maintain the building or how to hire the best professional to re-roof or replumb a building, redo the parquet membrane. I'm always cautious helping clients understand pros and the cons of buying into a building that might be self-managed. And I have one example here, 474 East 43rd, that is a self-managed building. It's just 10 units in this building. So it's kind of understandable that they don't have a professional management company. But what is also on top of being self-managed, on top of being small, they have a fairly high maintenance fee at $500. So I don't know a lot of what's going on. In fact, I don't know anything about what's going on in this building, but it does raise some red flags for me when I'm looking at it, partly because it's self-managed. And on top of that, because of that high maintenance fee, I'm going to ask some careful questions. I want to see some really good documentation. And if we don't see those things, well, I'm going to make sure that my client understands the risk when they're moving forward with a purchase like this one. In this case, I mean, the asking price of $460,000 for a 1-bedroom that's 600 square feet, there's a lot of value there. So they're compensating for the risk, for the lack of certainty. So, there is a bit of an explanation there. And then we have this one at 1717 Harrow, and this is a 25-unit building. So many times these buildings will be professionally managed. It's 667 square feet. It is a 1-bedroom, and the maintenance fees are fairly reasonable at $413 for that size. Not excessive, not super cheap, but within a reasonable amount. The interesting thing here, though, is for the management company's name, they have First Service Residential /Self. And so I wanted to point this out because this is a solution that some stratas will have. The risk when they're self-managed is there's a lot of skill that goes into managing the finances of a building, and also concern that the money might not be properly managed. So hiring a property management company just to do the oversight on the financials is a step that a lot of stratas will take. So they can pay a company like First Service Residential just to manage their financials, to collect the maintenance fees, to pay out bills, to do the accounting sort of on a monthly, annual basis. And you certainly pay something for that, but it's much less expensive than having the property management company cover everything. And so I like this. I like this as a solution for a smaller strata like this one. It would give me a little more confidence that the building is being well run and well managed. I mean, there's a lot of questions, a lot of things that we need to see beyond this, but I like it as a solution to alleviate some of those concerns for a smaller strata. So my bonus tip here is, yes, these are all red flags. Like if a price is too low, if a listing has been on and off the market, if a building is self-managed, if there's no photos, if there's only exterior photos, if a building's under a tarp, all of those things can be red flags, an indication that there's something seriously at issue with the property that you're looking at. But if you're going in with a good realtor on your side, somebody who can help you understand the risks involved and can help you investigate the red flags, and ultimately so that you go in with your eyes wide open and you feel like you're getting good value for whatever risks that you might be taking. All of these red flags can actually be incredible opportunities. And many of these red flags are also what I would say ways to get better deals in our market. An uncooperative tenant, as an example. I did a video, actually the video hasn't been released yet, but I sold a condo a couple months ago where clients jumped on a place where it was impossible to get in. And I went in and I videotaped it for them and I sent them the video. And based on that video, they purchased it. That property, my clients got an exceptional deal on. And the issue was that there was an uncooperative tenant who made it impossible to show that property. And we got a really good deal. And this is the sort of thing that you can do if you notice these red flags. You do need to be aware of them. You do need to investigate. You do need to understand what the risks are and move forward if you want with your eyes wide open, but they can lend themselves to really good opportunities. And that's something that I help my clients find in our market. And I am a real estate agent. I have been in this business for 18 years. I've seen a lot of red flags. I've helped hundreds of people move to Vancouver and move around Vancouver, and I can help you as well. If you're thinking of moving here and buying a home, be sure to reach out anytime. My contact information is right there on the screen. And of course, I do put out videos just like this one about moving to and living in Vancouver every single week. I do hope you enjoy this video, but be sure to check out all of my other videos because they're all trying to educate you about what our market is like, what it's like to live here, and how to navigate a very complicated process, purchasing and sometimes selling homes. And especially in Vancouver, a market that is incredibly fast moving, fast paced, and can be overwhelming if you don't have the right kind of help. So hopefully this video is something that you got a lot of value out of, you really enjoyed. I really do hope. If you did enjoy it, give me a like, smash the subscribe button to see more videos just like this one. And be sure to check out this video right here, which is all about mistakes I've seen people making when purchasing condos. That's number one. And this one is the second one. I couldn't keep it all in just one video, but both of those are videos that you should be checking out. Thank you so much for watching and sticking to this video all the way to the end. Oh, and of course, I hope you will join me on next week's video as well. See you there.